I am the middle of 5 children with a few age gaps between us, and for years my younger brother could, without dispute, claim the title of Black Sheep. I once sent my mother an essay by This American Life's David Sedaris entitled "You Can't Kill the Rooster," an utterly profanity-laced, hilarious memoir about his younger brother with the words, "Do you recognize anyone?" But then my sister grew up. My sister is 7 years younger than me, and she is the baby of the family, and as older siblings throughout the years have more or less unanimously agreed, these same people did not raise her who raised me. They may have the same social security numbers, but they are not the same people. As a result, my sister and my parents have a markedly different relationship than all of the rest of us have with my parents. They say things to each other from time to time that frankly make my jaw hit the floor. I was at their house one day, and my mother was mildly lamenting some fact of the matter, about something or the other she had experienced, and my sister came through the room. She clearly had already heard her fill about the relationship, so she tartly said, "And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it now, so you may as well pipe down about the matter," except that she didn't say it quite that nicely. My mother responded with an equally acerbic rejoinder, and I was left there scratching my head thinking, who are you people? There's one in every family, isn't there? You know, these days I think it's something of a cause célèbre to be the black sheep of any given organization. Now we prize individuality and gumption. But you know, the origin of the phrase is just a little bit darker, no pun intended. To be a black sheep in years gone by was quite a bit more painful. It was to be the one who was not like the others. And what's more, it was to be the one who was expected to make a bad end. You know, I've spent a lot of time in Scotland through the years, and during one of my longer sojourns there, I had the occasion to meet and to make friends with a sheep farmer, and I learned all sorts of things about sheep that I had never known. For instance, did you know that the wool of a black sheep will not accept dye? There is nothing you can do to it, no treatment you can do to the wool of a black sheep to make it accept dye that won't render the fiber useless. And so in the utter pragmatism of farm life, when a ewe would give birth to a lamb, if it was a black sheep, its destiny was pretty much sealed from that moment. That was the lamb who would wind up in the stew pot. So historically, the moniker of the black sheep has a rather harsher connotation to it than our rather warm feelings today might suggest. What's so interesting to me, though, about the biblical imagery of the shepherd is how absolutely ubiquitous it is. Everywhere we turn, there is shepherd imagery, whether in the Old Testament or the New Testament. When Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, he picks up on imagery that is laced throughout the Scriptures, particularly the imagery of the 23rd Psalm, which we just read. And in picking up this language of being the Good Shepherd, picking up this shepherd imagery, he plugs himself in even more fully to the legacy of King David, who of course himself was also a shepherd boy. And what's so very odd about this choice is that the shepherds of the ancient Near East were sort of the hard-bitten, roughneck cowboys of their day. Think Wild, Wild West, and you have the right image. These are the folks whose skin is tanned like leather from exposure to the elements. They may embody in our minds all of the romance and daring do of the tough guy scenarios, but you probably wouldn't want your child to marry one. So it's fine to talk about shepherds and so forth. Indeed, it's even biblical. But make no mistake about it. When we are talking about actual shepherds, we're talking about the black sheep. These are the people who take the high-risk professions because there is no alternative for them. So given everything that is laced up in that image, what a surprising choice for Jesus to make. Surely he should have picked a different metaphor, something a little kindlier, perhaps, maybe a little less threatening. Come to think of it, maybe the good sheepdog is more like it. Now think about that second. Cuddly, loyal, hardworking, and most importantly, won't piddle on the rug. That is what the establishment wanted out of Jesus, wasn't it? They wanted a company guy, somebody who wouldn't mess with the insider language of faith, someone who would reinforce their own images of themselves, someone who would not ruffle the feathers of the powerful, the big donors, the Hebrew political machine, and again, perhaps most importantly, won't piddle on the rug. And that's not Jesus. Of course, the Minority Report also had their opinion on the matter. They wanted a violent man who would leave a path of smoldering ruins where authority once lay, death and destruction in his wake for all who opposed him. Vengeance would finally belong to the Israelites for all the wrongs that had been done to them. Think wolf, and you have a more accurate image. Again, sort of the opposite of not piddling on the rug. And that's not Jesus either. Indeed, these passages from John can seem somewhat problematic if we pay close attention with all the language about who gets to the Father and how. Indeed, I worry sometimes when we read these passages that are so clear as to Jesus' role and identity as the Good Shepherd that they might be read in a way that is exclusive, a way that reinforces exactly the wrong image. That if we conform to a particular norm of what entails a Christian life, that we'll somehow be rewarded after we die. And by its converse, that if we do not conform to this notion, if we are a person of little faith or different faith, that our fate is sealed by the God who weighs what sort of sheep we are and makes a determination whether we go in the fold or the pot. That couldn't be any further from the truth. If we read on in the 10th chapter of John, from the portion we read this morning, we see where Jesus himself says, I have other sheep who are not of this fold. And John isn't really clear what he means by this phrase, but it does seem that perhaps Jesus' attention isn't confined to the one sheepfold only. So that's not the point. Jesus isn't talking about what sort of sheep he wants. No, he is making a point about what sort of God he's talking about. This is the sort of God that Jesus is talking about, that goes to the lengths that a shepherd would go to in order to make certain that not one single sheep goes missing, in order to assure that not one single sheep is left behind. The good shepherd who would put his life on the line so that not one single sheep falls prey to the wolves. And here's the reality. We do know, don't we, that there are ravenous wolves out there. The wolves have names. Did you know that? The wolves that salivate over the sheep are named things like poverty and racism and homophobia and elitism. The wolves have names like addiction and mental illness and substance abuse. The wolves have names like spousal abuse and economic dependency and human trafficking. There are loads of wolves out there. But the good shepherd doesn't give up on any of the sheep. The good shepherd never stops seeking the lost sheep and the hurt sheep and, well, frankly, the sheepish sheep. And of course, with all those wolves slavering over, salivating, separating out the black sheep, waiting for it to be abandoned because it is the one that is not like the others, in the path of least resistance, the black sheep does frequently wind up being thrown to the wolves. And any number of excuses can be given. We've heard them all, and they generally boil down to something like this: we cared more about the one thing than we did about the other. So what's a good shepherd to do? Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine and I were traveling to Iona together one summer. You remember Iona. It's a tiny little island down at the southernmost tip of the Inner Hebrides. We have a picture of it on the stained glass window out this door. A number of us have been there, and the one thing I think we can all agree on is that it takes forever to get there. From Edinburgh, one boards a train and goes to Oban, wherein one boards a ferry to get across to the island of Mull, and then one rides a bus down a single-track road to the ferry dock in Finnefort before getting on yet another ferry to cross over to the island. As you heard me listing that assortment of planes, trains, and automobiles, you may be asking, what is a single-track road? Well, let me tell you. A single-track road is a road that is barely wide enough for one car to drive down, with periodic bump outs on each side so that as you encounter oncoming traffic, you pull off to the side and allow the other car to pass by. The single-track road that leads from Craignier down to Finnefort is also shared with semi-tractors carrying timber from the south part of the island back up to the north part of the island. One drives this path at one's peril. It is a harrowing experience. It primes you so that by the time you reach Iona, you're ready for a spiritual experience, having brushed against God so many times on the way down. So I was driving my friend Eleanor's little Mazda station wagon down this winding road when Sherry spotted a sign for an organic farm coming up on the left. Now, Sherry loves all things organic and local and natural, and in my middle age I have come to as well, but at that stage of my life I was still perfectly comfortable with bovine growth hormone and all sorts of various dyes. So I said no. But she said yes, and being vacation, I didn't want to argue, so the next thing I knew, we were veering off to the left to head down to this organic farm. Why to this day, I still don't know. I'm sure it knocked years off the life of that little Mazda. But we worked our way through several miles down roads that were little more than ruts until we found our way to a farmyard between several stone barns that formed a courtyard between them, and the sign read Ardalnish Farm. So we got out of the car to go in, and I was sort of expecting to find the things that you normally find in a Scottish farm store: a little bit of goat cheese and some iron brew, something to fortify yourself for what was ahead. And I was shocked instead to see on the shelves of the store sweaters and blankets and scarves, and they were in all sorts of beautiful colors: dark browns and light browns and grays and sort of a reddish orange burnt umber shade. The sales clerk looked up and said, "Welcome." And we looked around at all of these beautiful woolens, and we read on the sign, "All of our wool is dye-free and organic." I was intrigued. These were rich colors, but yet the sign said it was dye-free. So I asked the clerk about it, and instead of answering, she said, "Come with me." So we walked outside and up a short path past the farmhouse to a pasture, and it was full of sheep. She said, "Do you notice anything?" "Yes," I said. The sheep were all different colors. They were shades of brown and gray and burnt umber, that reddish shade, just like the blankets and the sweaters in the store. So she said, "Would you like to see our looms?" I said, "Of course, yes, I'd love to see the looms." And as I saw where they wove those beautiful fabrics, she told me the story of the farm. The original owner of the loom had been a weaver in Glasgow who decided to retire and discovered there was no market for his loom in the United Kingdom, as most of the textile industry had in years gone by left the country. So, despairing of the possibility of selling his loom and his equipment, he decided finally simply to give them up for scrap to get them out of his barn. This couple who owned the farm read his ad in the paper and called him and said, "I can't afford to buy your loom, but if you really are just giving it away for scrap, could I have the whole thing? I have an interest in learning to weave." And so they traveled to Glasgow with a great big truck to get the loom. And when they got there, they spoke to this widowed weaver and asked him, "Would you teach us to weave?" And so he did. It turns out that this particular couple, having for their whole lives marched to be their own drummer themselves, had a soft spot in their heart for the black sheep. So they put the word out to the farming community of Argyle and Butte that if your ewe gives birth to a black lamb, we will buy it. Turns out that the wool of the black sheep doesn't take dye. Did you know that? Doesn't need to. In the hands of the master weaver, the black sheep becomes something that couldn't have been made any other way. That is the Good Shepherd.